Hi, everybody, and welcome to Halodata's new podcast, Leadership with Sports Legends. My name is Resham Ganglani. I'm the CEO of Halodata Group, and I'm very happy to have many guests lined up for this special series. Now, the question arises, what has IT security got to do with sports legends? Nothing directly, but the fact is, as an entrepreneur, I have a lot of leaders in my company, and every time we discuss situations, every time we discuss scenarios or strategies, we always revert back to sports, and we always report back to football, of course, based in Singapore. So what happened was, a discussion with a few friends said, we should realign sports and strategy together. And there's nothing better than talk about leadership with sports legends of the region. We've got a great lineup of guests. Today we have a very special guest, a member of our board, an advisor to the company. Please welcome everybody, our Sasikumar, to our show. Mr. Sasikumar, please join in. So,
Hi,
of course,
Resham.
hi, Mr. Sassy, and welcome to the show. If you don't know Sassy, he's now known as Sasikumar Ramu on LinkedIn. Very, very special guest for us today. He's an entrepreneur. He's an ex-footballer in Singapore. He has some special moments in football, which I'll talk about shortly. But welcome to the show, Sassy. Very, very, very happy to have you on board today.
Thank you, Resham. Likewise as well. It's great to be on this podcast talking about leadership, and I hope we have a good time chatting about leadership and everything in between.
Yes, when I've spoken to my team, it's always whenever we try to break down a situation or we try to motivate the team or encourage the team, we always talk about teamwork. It always comes down to football. And I'm a big United fan, and it always comes down to Sir Alex Ferguson and how he would do or how these things happen in the past. So that's where we decided that, maybe we should talk to a few of the local professionals and people who have made it in different areas of life, with their leadership skills and their entrepreneurship skills, and thought we'll bring them together. So for those who don't know you, maybe Sassy, a few words about yourself before I dive in.
Yeah, so a quick intro about myself. I was a professional footballer. I did that for almost 12 years, and then I tried my hand at coaching, and quickly realized that you got to actually be even more dedicated as a coach more than a player. And I wasn't ready for that kind of a life. I just wanted to transition on to doing something else. And I found entrepreneurship and sports marketing, sports management very intriguing. And I believe that if I took all the experience I had as a professional athlete into the business world, and especially in the field of sports and sports marketing, maybe I stand a chance of excelling. It's been 20 years now. I'm still in this field. I'm still doing stuff and really enjoying. I like to say that I never worked a day in my life because it will always work, always play rather. When I was a player and then transitioning on to the sports business, I love what I do. I impact lives. I help share my knowledge through sports. So that's what I do.
Great. So let's talk about that football career first before we deep dive into leadership and strategy. We have the hand of God, but I think in this part of the world, we called it the shoulder of God in the 1998 ASEAN Football Federation Cup final against Vietnam. You scored that very, very special goal that brought, Singapore to its football highs, the first championship. If I'm not wrong, it was called the Tiger Cup in those days. Can you take us back to that day and share what was going through your mind the moment you scored and that historic goal for Singapore? Because it was quite at the end of the game as well.
Yeah, so let's rewind back maybe to about 20 something years ago. Seems like an eternity ago, almost like my past life. But before the goal, I wanna give you a bit of a context from where I came from. I was a tall, skinny kid from Yishun trying to make it in life, like many people. Maybe they can resonate with this. It was a journey that was tough because I wasn't the most talented player. Even when I was young with my own neighborhood team, I was never selected. But because I was a big kid, they always stuck me in goal and say, "Well, you're useless playing up front. Stay in goal. Maybe you can be useful for us." So it was a tough journey as a young teenager. Like a lot of teenagers, we don't know what we are doing, lacking a lot of self-esteem, not really talented at everything. But I think there was a time. My first love was actually hockey. I played hockey and I was selected for the Singapore under 15 at the time. I think the turning point came when I was dropped from the Singapore under 15 hockey team. Who happened that our one of our MPs, Christopher D'Souza, was also in our team. He's actually a very talented hockey goalkeeper back then. And when I got dropped from the team, my world ended. My heart was broken because hockey was my first love. But then again, like they say in life, that when a door closes, a window opens, and a window of opportunity in football opened, and I went all in. And I realized that without talent, hard work can actually take you very far. So I just wanted to be the hardest working guy, the toughest guy to beat on the field, and that really propelled my I would say my progression in football. Started playing in local leagues and eventually got selected for the Singapore second national team, the Singapore B team, and then escalated towards the first team. And in my first competition as a starter for the national team in the Tiger Cup, like you said back then, I had an opportunity to score that wonderful goal. Um, a little bit of a backstory. Barry Whitbread, who was my coach back then, I used to tell him before every game, Coach, I'm going to score today. I'm going to score today. And he was like, just before this game, he came up to me and said, Sassy, you know that promise that you made, the empty promises you made? Tonight might be a good time for you to score that goal and, keep your promise, right? So you're right. Around about, I would say, 60 something minutes, 70 something minutes. I went up for a corner. The corner didn't really reach me, and I decided to stay up front. Don't know for whatever reason, I just stayed up front. The ball dropped to Kadeyaya, as we know, the legendary Kadeyaya, and then he then punted the ball back into the box. Everybody says the shoulder, but it was a perfect header. I don't know what you guys are watching, but it was a
Oh, well,
perfect header.
someone told me something else, but I don't want to say it on air. But
That's okay. So yeah, but all the goals count, right? And it doesn't matter how you score, right? With the hand, with the foot. I just keep telling people that if Fundy scored that goal, they'll say, "Wow, look at that beautiful goal score he scored with his
well,
shoulder."
Fandi has a lot of goals to talk about. You have that one
Yeah,
magical first one that everyone will
yeah.
remember for a lifetime. So
Yeah, no, I think that was really special. That was really special. I think that was probably the defining moment of all I would say, the ups and downs. And both my boys are now aspiring footballers, and I always tell them this, that in football, 90% of it is really the tough times, the injuries, the loss of form. That's 90% of the time. The 10% is the time when you score goals like this, when you win championships, when you have a great time. But however, the 10% of the upside really outweighs the 90% of the downtime and the really depressive moment times and all the self-doubt that creeps in. So you're basically only living for 10%, and I lived that 10% through that goal.
So, when we talk about that period in time, you won 70 World Caps as a defender. Looking back, what do you think is the one key success or one key lesson from the game that you can bring back, that you've brought from the days, like you said, starting off as a skinny kid from Yishun, working through your way to the B team, to the A team, playing in the national team, playing in the newly formed S League at that time. What is the one lesson that, you've started off with and that's not disappeared till today?
I think the skill of self-realization, the self-awareness. The moment you realize that you're not good at something and you need to compensate with something else, I think that's where the true breakthrough happens. In my case, it was I had no talent, right? I won't say zero talent, but I didn't have the talent to play at that level. But one thing I would say, I would proudly say that I had more than anybody else was a strong will and a very strong mentality. I think I wanted to win more than anybody else. I was really willing to put in the work more than anybody else. So I took pride in saying that if I played against a striker, there's no way he's going to outrun me. There's no way. Like he can't work harder than me because when I went to trainings, I always told myself that if I didn't walk out the field being the hardest worker in the field, I failed that day. So that has stuck with me. And when I started my business as well, it's the same thing. So I went into world of sports marketing management where it was dominated by American firms, Japanese firms, European firms. And then there's this guy who's just retired from football trying to go at the big boys. And everybody laughed. And I said, if I can bring the same mentality I had into football, into business, I might have some success. we were the ones that never went away. If you look at my company, we're almost 20 years old. We never went away. Other firms came and left, but we are still here. So it really shows that it was that mental toughness, that resilience, that willingness to put in the work, willingness to do the things that other people don't want to do. That's what I think I took pride while I was doing when I was a professional footballer, and then I took that into the business world and tried and implement that kind of a mental strength and the way to think about approaching things with my team. Was not always successful, but I thought I managed to get the troops
I
70%,
think
80% of the times to think that way.
that's very interesting because I was just talking to my team the other day, and I was saying we don't play to play, we play to win. And you have the same mentality that you bring forward. We'll talk about your business shortly and your entrepreneur journey, but before that, right? You moved from the state of being a player to a coach and then pundit. We've seen you on TV, talking about games. You've also been very vocal about Singapore football. I think everyone, right, has an opinion about Singapore football, right? Whether it's the 60,000 people at Kallang or the guy at the coffee shop, everyone has an opinion about Singapore football. We've seen a lot, we've been through a lot. What do you think needs, before we move on to talking about the business, what do you think needs to happen to Singapore football to bring us back to the glory days?
I think we need another 3 days to talk about that, right? It's going to be a rather long podcast, but I'll concise it for you. I think we've gone through a period where um, people in power, people who made decisions back then, did what was convenient, right? They did what was convenient, what was good for the moment, without really thinking about the long-term impact about football. And in some ways, I don't blame them because they were very myopic about what was important then. We do that a lot in business. What's important now, we sometimes don't tend to think about the 5 years, 10 years. And I suppose that's what they were thinking about what it was important now. But they forgot about the bigger picture that, as a small nation, we need to be punching above our weight. It's like a small company. If you're gonna last through time, you need to be really planning long term. They fail to do that. And that's where we find ourselves when all our neighbors have kind of made plans for, 10, 15, 20 years. We thought about this season and the next season. And that's what we're paying. So where we are in football today is not a result of what happened in the last 2 years. It was what happened in the last 15 years. And I was privy to that because I saw the slump over the years. And in many ways, we try to address and help because we're part of the industry. Obviously, you can't influence everything. You can do your own bit. But that's where we are today.
So what you're saying, if I could paraphrase it, is we need a vision like how we plan our airports. We're talking about Terminal 5, like how we talked about the stadium and how we talked about, Formula One race as a sport, how it's planned 5, 10 years in advance. Do you think that that's part of why Singapore football never took off? Because I remember when the S League started, we had World Cup players. We had the players from Iran. We had very good footballers coming in. And over the years, I don't think that Singapore football has reached the heights unless perhaps recently when the Lion City Sailors were set up to be run as a more established professional outfit, and we recently saw last week that we won in the Asian Cup games, club games overseas.
Resham, I've been asked this question over the last, I would say, decade, right? And every time I answer it differently, and also that also comes with wisdom. And over time, you see things differently. So, I'll take the opportunity to explain it this way: that it's in our DNA as Singaporeans to be planning long term. We always do that. We look at from our CPF perspective, buying buying a house or a car with our children, the way we buy insurance, we are always planning long term, right?
You agree to
And
get married before you buy a BTO.
there you go. There you go. That's to the level of detail that we plan forward. And that
Right.
has been taught from us from a very young age. And that's what puzzles me really when it comes to sports, where people have not thought about the future, right? The future of the sport, how it's gonna actually evolve over time. And people in power at that time were quite myopic and maybe even agenda driven on what's important for them now rather than the sport itself. I say this again, and I say with the utmost respect to people who were running back then. we all have agendas. We all do. We will not take the higher ground and say we don't have the agenda. We all have agendas, but does the agenda align with the growth of the future of the sport? Unfortunately, at that time, it didn't. It was more personal agendas, but you know, on hindsight, sometimes bad things need to happen so that you can build on that, right?
Sure, exactly. So let's talk about bad things that needed to happen. You had to retire from football,
Mm.
right? And you had to retire. We've seen a lot of footballers retire and take on coaching. We've seen a lot of footballers take on. But after retiring, you founded the Red Card Group, right? Red Card Global, a sports marketing firm. You jump from football to that, right? And what inspired you first as a fellow entrepreneur? What inspired you first to go and leap into the entrepreneurship journey? Because that itself takes a lot of guts, I would say. And then, I know your history, which we'll talk about, but how did you turn that jump into a vision, into a reality for yourself?
So I think it has to do a lot with my background because I was the kid that was always on the other side of the fence, looking into to a big house, to a family that lived really well, had all the luxuries, and I was the kid on the other side of the fence, thinking like, how did they get there? That happened in secondary school when I was in Wheatley Secondary School, and it was in Stevens Road where all my friends were living in Bukit Timah. When I went to their house, visited them, they had like big cars, big houses, and I was really puzzled, like, because I come from a very working class family. My dad was a cab driver, my mom worked in a factory. So we didn't see all of that. We didn't see ambition. We didn't see, because my folks were just working to put food on the table, like many folks there. I was not exposed to the world of entrepreneurship. I was not exposed to the world of luxury, wealth, or whatever. But I was seriously curious. I was seriously intrigued on how they got there. So I started asking questions. I think that's where it all started. When you start asking questions, your mind completely works in a different way. So one of the things that I became really curious, and I was obsessed with information. Like, how do I do something? So when I started talking to people and they're saying something called being a business person, being an entrepreneur, well, I would say the word entrepreneur back then didn't really exist. People were referred as business people or businessmen, it was that.
Okay.
Yeah, tauke, right? So entrepreneurship was maybe, in the new millennium, that's where it became really funky and stuff like that. So that's
Right.
how I got intrigued, and I asked myself, well, if someone like that can do it, how can I do it? So I always had this itch to become a businessman at some point. To be honest, even when this is really funny when I look back, they you talk about manifesting into their role. So I used to act like I was a businessman. Like I would fake phone calls, like saying I do this, do that, and stuff like that, to put myself in a situation where I was actually a owner of a business. When I look back, it looks so childish, but it was really manifesting your dream, right? You got to put it out there to the
You have to
universe and
look the
stuff like
part,
that.
right? You have to act the part to
Yeah,
be where you are.
yeah. So it was so strange. I mean, when I look back now, it's almost like cringeworthy. What was I doing? But what I really was doing was manifesting my future. That was really what I was doing.
What
But
was the first big step you took?
so I think it was when I'll go back to the first ever business idea that we were in secondary school, and a couple of guys got together and we said, you know what? Since we are cool guys, let's throw a party. Like, we'll sell tickets, we make the most coolest party, because that was the low hanging fruit for us back then. So three of us, we kind of said, okay, we'll find this place. We found a hall and we started printing tickets. And we were so naive, thinking that everything, we didn't know about sales, we didn't know about marketing. Just because we were cool, we thought everybody would come, right? In the end, it was like 8 people who turned up, and some thugs turned up, and then they trashed the place. One of my friends got punched, and it was a $800 bill, damage bill that was given to us. So you can imagine back then in secondary school, I'm talking about, 80s or something like that. And it must have been 90s. I'm losing track of time now. And $800 is a lot of money. Might as well be
Right.
$1 million, right?
Right.
But thank God, one of the boys, he came from a well-to-do family. The mom, brought us all in, and she was an entrepreneur back then. She said, "Listen, boys, I know what you're trying to do. I'll cover the 800, and you guys pay me when you can. So pay your part, right?" So I had to work in McDonald's over the school holidays to make some money and pay her back. But that was my first dip of my toe into the world of entrepreneurship. Uh, but after that, it almost became like a bug. Like you caught the disease of entrepreneurship. So you couldn't stop. You always thinking about what can I do next and do more. But it really happened to me after I came back because I finished playing at 29, like you rightfully said, very, very young for a footballer. I was just thinking that what will I do next? And it really coincided with an opportunity for me to move to Australia to work in a firm, in a sports marketing firm in Australia, Melbourne. I took off and that lasted for maybe I would say 18 months, and then I came back and I started looking for jobs. I actually did really well in Australia. I placed a cricket coach of India, which is like the second most important job after the prime minister's job.
Right.
And an accident, completely by accident, because I first of all I didn't understand cricket, not one thing. We just happened to be at the right place, right time, and we had a staff member that had a great idea, and we went forward and made that happen. But when I came back, no one was willing to give me a job because they still saw me as a footballer. I was on TV a lot, so that didn't really help me because the image on TV is that a former footballer talking about football, right? And what does he know about entrepreneurship? So all of that kind of worked against me. But I thought to myself, if I'm not going to get a job, let me create one, and that's where I started Reka Global.
Great, great. And, we'll talk a bit more about Reka Global shortly, but in part of your journey of being an entrepreneur, you talk about putting in the coach from India into Australia, right? And it was a very great experience. It was a big project, something different to you. But even in Singapore, right, if you trace back what Red Card Global's contribution has been, uh, as a sports marketing agency, you brought many high stars into Singapore, very high profile footballers. But two projects that were stand out, doing some research about your Reka Global, that you reinvigorated the Lion City Cup and you also brought German talent to Singapore. What's your process for, identifying and executing game-changing opportunities in sports? Because, today we're talking about leadership and we're talking about identifying opportunity, right? I think part of a leader's role has always been to identify opportunity, do a SWOT analysis, see where to bring the company to. What's your process, for identifying game-changing opportunities in sports industry or in any industry for that matter? I don't think it's very different across the business.
Yeah. It's a fantastic question, Resham. I think where I started was I always had a knack for looking out for undervalued properties, things that people didn't really like or was hard to do. I go back to the point where I always like to do the things that people don't want to do, right? So I always looked at opportunities where there was something that we could build on with our own expertise. So, for example, the Lion City Cup wasn't something that we invented. We didn't create it. The FAS back in '77 created it. It was the oldest football tournament in the world that inspired the FIFA Youth World Cup. And at that time, our cups, if you remember from the YOG days, the Youth Olympic days, they won the bronze medal, and there was euphoria around this team.
Right.
And I took the opportunity to say, what if we brought an under 16 tournament and we included these guys because the entire nation was behind them. We hosted the first ever Youth Olympic Games. So I suppose the thought process was looking at undervalued property and looking at what's hot at the moment and combining both together. So that's what we did. So we went to the Football Association and said, we'll buy the right for $1 for 3 years, 4 years. And then we went to a sponsor and credit to Canon, who our title sponsor at the time, and Andrew Ko, who was the marketing director at the time and was a director at Canon Singapore. And he said, we sold this vision, right? So like all good entrepreneurs, good leaders, you need to sell a vision. Like you really need to be able to articulate and sell a vision. And that's what we did with Andrew at Canon and say, listen, we got the oldest football tournament in the world. You are a sports sponsor. You do all kind of sponsorship. But what if we brought it back to grassroots level and then we created this international tournament? So like all good business people, Andrew was skeptical in the beginning, like how big can you get this? So we pitched. I like to think I'm a good salesman. I pitched a very nice runway and I said, this is what's going to happen. And they bought into our vision. We brought some of the best youth academies in the world. And what we did was maybe a bit of a masterstroke on our part is that we managed to close broadcast deals globally. So it was one of the few youth tournaments in the world that had broadcast coverage from around the world. So we did a deal with Eurosport and all of that stuff. So their marketing dollars now suddenly became global,
Right.
right? So we brought a platform. So our partnership became stronger. When the Lion City Cup happened, we were selling tickets for, I believe, was $15 at the time, where it was back-to-back games, and the SPL or the S League at the time was selling professional league tickets for $5,
Right.
right? So we priced ourselves higher than
And you sold
what.
out.
Yeah, we sold out. So, and the thing was, everyone's saying it's impossible that you're going to sell $15, but we were sold out. Like we had 5 to 7,000 people every match day, 11 match days, and stuff like that. And we had a wonderful experience, and everybody walked away happy. So I suppose that was one of the things that we always did. We looked for undervalued assets, undervalued projects, and then we put our own expertise and put a nice icing on the cake, and then made it profitable for us. Coming back to something like Jermaine Pennant, it was the same thing. We looked at opportunity, and by chance, I happened to be talking to Jermaine Pennant's agent in the UK, who happened to manage a lot of these stars, and he said, "My boy Jermaine Pennant is looking for a gig. Will you help me in Singapore?" And I was like, "We can't pay a guy who played in the Champions League to come." He said, "No, no, he's looking for something modest." And at that point in time, the chairman of Tampines Rovers was my friend, and I said, "Listen," and a big Liverpool fan as well. That helped. And I said, "I've got a big name for you, and we can make the deal at this price point." And he went like, "Nah, there's no way." We spoke on we spoke on a Thursday. No, we spoke on a Friday, and Jermaine landed on a Wednesday in Singapore, and it was big news. And we brought back the crowd again back to Tampines in his first match. And the funny thing was, Tampines Rovers were playing in Clementi at that time, or Jurong West at that time. They moved stadium, right?
This
And we
this this
still
is
fill
a
the stadium.
Singapore thing, right? This is a
Yeah, yeah,
Singapore.
yeah. So we still fill the stadium with 5,000 people. And then his wife, when his wife came, and then the crowd doubled. We all know what his wife was, a paid model and stuff like that. So again, it's good timing. It's again looking at undervalued assets, looking at things that people didn't want to do, and there are many examples like this. I can tell you another few examples that we did that really put us on another level in terms of our
So to
business.
summarize what you've just said for everyone listening in, it's about looking at undervalued assets and undervalued opportunities, doing things that people don't want to do, market it well, as you say, you're a great salesman, market it well, position it well, take advantage of the opportunity, and then get things going together. So on that note, right, as a mentor to budding entrepreneurs, you've mentored me, and people who are listening on this podcast who are starting out, or even, team players as well. What is the most common mistake you see business owners make, and how do you guide them past it? And what do you think is let's identify what is the common mistake, and then let's see how we can get past it.
So the one of the biggest mistakes I see in people, I'm actually mentoring an entrepreneur right now, who's been on my program, and he's taken a year to start. Right, every time we start, we plan to get on a call. He's postponed it. He's when I give him tasks, so I kind of like said, stop. Let's go and see what's really affecting you. So what was really affecting him is that he wanted everything to be perfect, right? He wanted the right timing. He wanted to be perfect. He wanted to get everything. I said, listen, two things in life. There's no good time to get married, and there's no good time to die. It just happens, right? It just happens, and then you respond to things, right? So
Right.
being an entrepreneur is like that. Starting a business is like that. First, you get the idea, then you execute on it. A lot of people are worried to execute for the worry that they worry about what people will say about them. They worry about, what if I fail? Let me let me give you a tip here. You are supposed to fail. You are supposed to fail in your first part of it. And let's go back to example Halodata. If we have to rewind back on time and you look at the first thing that you put out at Halodata, you'll be thinking like, what was I thinking? Right?
Yeah, I
So
mean, where we started is not where we are today. It's been a
exactly my point, right? Exactly my point. So whatever you do, the first version is gonna suck.
right.
You got to come to terms with that. The moment you come past that, then I think everything is magic, because once you get past that voice in your head that don't do it, or don't do the perfect timing, got to be this. No. So once you actually execute and you fail because you are supposed to fail, that's
Yeah.
part of the journey. You're supposed to trip. You're supposed to not sell. That's why it's called iteration. So you iterate from point version one to version two, and then you take it to market. You're supposed to get feedback. But a lot of entrepreneurs get stuck in their head that they have to have the shiniest website. Their product must be fully done. So that is really stopping people from really starting or even being an entrepreneur in the end.
And that's exactly why I relate leadership with sports. I am in total agreement. There's no sportsman who has never lost a game, right? I remember Roger Federer saying he only won 52% of the matches that he played. Oh, sorry, 52% of the points that he played, 70% of the matches, right? And he said that's the thing. You need to learn, you need to accept that you're going to fail. You're not going to hit the perfect ball every single time. It reminds me of Arsenal since we love to talk about football. And Arsenal in the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, trying to always score that perfect goal, walk the ball into the goal. And, it is thing. I think it's great advice. Because we're never going to start perfect. I think 20 years in the business ourselves, we're never perfect. It's always a new experience. We make mistakes, we learn from them, and then we take it from there. Now, this is, you talk about the successes and the failures of a business. One of the things that stood out, I think, in Singapore sports marketing or in general in Asia, is that you sold Red Card at that time for a figure, double-digit million figure. We don't need to deep dive into that. But I'm sure in that entrepreneurship journey, in that leadership journey that you set out to do, you definitely had to make some sacrifices. You definitely had to take some tough decisions. A, how difficult was that? And B, how did football or your discipline in football, as you mentioned, trying to be the most hardworking guy as a skinny kid from Yishun, how did that apply to you at this process? Because I think one of the toughest thing about an entrepreneur first is building up your company as a baby and then letting go. And yeah, you can let go for good money, but I'm sure all the blood, sweat, tears you had to get there uh, had an effect on what you were thinking at that time. Maybe you can share more about that journey.
So, Resham, I have gray hair or no hair for a reason, right? Because it's a test of time. Um, I always say that entrepreneurship is the highest form of self-development,
Right.
right? If you want to find out about self, start a business. You very quickly will find out about what kind of person you are, right? But for me, it was really tough because just the other day when I was back in Singapore, my cousin's son came to me and he said, "Uncle, I want to start a business. What advice you have for me?" So the first thing that came to my mind and I said, "Are you happy not to have a salary for the next 5 years?" And he looked at me like he was shocked. I said, "Are you okay with being not paid for the next 5 years?" And he said, "Maybe not." Then I said, "Well, entrepreneurship is not for you because I remember clearly in my first 5 years it was a struggle, real struggle. Living from hand to mouth, credit cards are always full. You wake up in the middle of the night thinking, how am I gonna survive the next month? How am I gonna pay the bill that I have?" So some days I don't wish entrepreneurship on my biggest enemy, right? I just don't because it's not for everyone. It's definitely not for the faint-hearted. If you like comfort, this is not the game to play, right? But what I'll say is that because the game is so hard to play, because that you need to play a long game, not everybody lasts. So if you can build something and last the pace like we did in our industry, you then clearly stand out and you win the respect of people. And then a lot more projects start to come to you purely because they know you survive the storm, you survive everything that was possibly thrown at you, and you're still here. That means you're not a fly-by-night company. You have credibility behind you. People want to work with you. So for me, it was the tough for 4 or 5 years, almost on the verge of giving up. Really feeling shitty about yourself every day. Like you wake up sometimes you wonder why you're doing this to yourself. And then you look at your peers, right? And then friends are like, they work in corporate, they're driving nice cars, nice house, and they're always traveling, posting about where they are going on holidays and on what projects they're working. And you go like, if I took this corporate path, probably, I have a big chance of going somewhere and doing. But then I asked the questions, will I be happier employed or will I be happier employing people? So the answer was very clear to me. I wanted to control my destination. I wanted to create my own legacy. I wanted to do things that I want to do on my terms, whether I fail or not. Because if something were to happen to me today and maybe I had a few minutes to live and relive my life, I would say I would never change one moment of whatever happened in my life. Not one. I won't say regrets. I have things that probably I would have done better, but regrets none, because everything that happened in my life, especially in business, has put me exactly where I'm supposed to be today.
So, you talked about this entrepreneurship and you talked about the first 5 years of not taking a salary and struggling and everything. Do you think that that time when you were back to being making that switch from hockey to football and then having to start all over again and then putting in the work and then hopefully you got into the B team, hopefully you got into the A team. You never knew, but you had to take that that chance. You had to work for it, right?
Yeah, you have to work for it. I think at the end of the day, hard work is paramount. It's one of the things that it's a byproduct, right? So it's not. You can't sit here and meditate and say, I'm going to manifest everything into reality, right? Of course, if you believe in manifestation, you got to do that, but you actually got to put in the work. What it really means is that once you bring a vision to life, you got to take some action or take some massive action, right? For me, it
Right.
was taking massive action. Until today, I think I lose track of days and times. Like, I don't really pay attention to public holidays. I don't pay attention to birthdays, holidays. There's no concept of time because I work all the time, whenever I can. I'm
Always
pretty
on
sure you understand
24/7, right? I think
24/7.
I think any entrepreneur will tell you that 24/7, you can't switch off. There's no
You can't.
off button that you can go.
Yeah.
So
So
on that note, right, Sassy, on that note, let's talk about this whole thing because I see you travel around the world. The high-speed hustle of entrepreneurship with the patience required to build something last. You talk about the reason you succeeded is because you lasted the race, you lasted the whole journey, and then at the same time, it's always a hustle and bustle. We can't switch off, just like you said. The question here is for entrepreneurs listening or for people who think they want to step into leadership roles, because I don't think it's cut only for entrepreneurs. I think
yeah.
leadership roles, you take charge of a team, you're leading people, you still have that same challenge, right? What is the tips you have for people going through this hustle bustle, always on 24/7, and then sometimes having doubts?
Resham, again, you asked the best questions. I'll tell you, until today, like, I mean, you label as success or what I have. I'll tell you, until today, I have the imposter syndrome. Until today.
Right.
Right. I have nobody to prove to. I have nothing in my life that I need to show. My portfolio shows with some, my work show. Yet I still feel like an imposter. But I think, I listened to a podcast. This guy is a VC, he's a billionaire, and it was so strange for me to hear him say, the guy has everything on earth, everything. He's a billionaire, right? And he still feels that he has this imposter syndrome.
Right.
But I think a part of success of being an entrepreneur is always not thinking that you have arrived, always thinking there's always something more to do. There's somebody better than you in this subject matter in the world that
Right.
gives you that imposter syndrome that keeps you on your toes to be better and better all the time. So I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing, but I think that if you have an imposter syndrome, that's perfectly normal. It's perfectly normal.
Being uncomfortable is what drives you for success, right? If you're
Yeah,
comfortable in position, you won't be.
I don't know if I shared. I mean, I probably shared that video with you with this Olympian gymnast, and she talks about. Um, so she was feeling anxiety. She was preparing for the Olympics, and she was feeling all kind of emotions. And she went to her coach was an Olympian herself and saying, I'm feeling all this emotion. And he says, you know, if you felt happy all the time, something's wrong. Or if you felt sad all the time, something's also very wrong. But you
Right,
have this mixed emotion where you feel one third of the time you're anxious, one third of the time you're happy, one third of the time you're sad, which means growth is happening. That's a
right.
sign that growth is happening. So, and I looked at that and said, like, it's really profound, like really profound. And when I go through things myself and I see sometimes I'm happy, sometimes I'm sad, sometimes I'm in between, then I tell myself that, okay, I'm in the growth phase. So I give myself comfort saying that actually I'm growing.
So talking about growing, I'm going to switch gears on you. You moved to Madrid in 2021, right, with your family, and it was a big move. I think for you as a family, individuals, for your young boys then. And today, a few years later, your sons are now part of the Atletico Madrid youth teams. First and foremost, what prompted that move? How has that living in Spain influenced your perspective on football and maybe even life? Because you've come out of this pressure cooker Singapore. So,
Yeah, so I think it was multiple things that happened that got me thinking about life beyond the shores of Singapore. I've always wanted my kids to be international citizens, global citizens rather. I wanted them have a more global outlook about life, about growing up, where they can see different things and grow up differently. While Singapore offers a safe haven for kids, fantastic education, extremely safe. I don't think so. The new world is set out to be like that. You and I know we travel a lot. We know that the new world is never going to be like that. Um, so I really crave for that. And then at that point in time, I was also craving for my own personal professional growth. And I've always wanted to work in European football, and that's something that I wanted to do badly. And that
it's the
everything came
holy
together where
grail.
my boys, sorry?
It's like the holy grail of football to be working in
Yeah.
European leagues.
So exactly, right? And then at that point in time, my kids were showing both my boys were showing talent in football. I felt that I was really stifled after 15, 16 years in Singapore. And then I had to convince the wife that we're going to move abroad, which for most of you know who are married is never an easy thing, right? So even though I kind of call myself a good salesman, this sales pitch was probably the hardest pitch ever in my life. But she saw the need for us to all move as a family to have a different experience and stuff like that, and that's when the change happened. Resham, we sold everything, put everything we had in four bags, and we moved to Madrid. Never in a million years did I ever think I would do that, but we did, and we are really happy we did it because
So what
we
changed? What's changed, Sasi, from leaving Singapore to moving to Spain? Um, what changed from a perspective of football in general, because you're working in football and life in general? Uh, do you feel that it's a great decision? Do you feel that, you've experienced one part of the world being safe in Singapore with everything planned out where you pretty well, and going to Spain where, if I'm not wrong, you didn't even speak the language before you
no,
landed.
no.
So how has that journey been?
I think we were fortunate because I mean, we traveled. I mean, I've traveled to Spain many, many times. In fact, I think maybe it was more than 15 years ago when my wife and we toured Spain and Portugal. I kind of joke and say, if we ever were to move, let's move to Spain. Spain is probably one of the places where I think it's a famous place for having good weather, good food, good people around, and stuff like that. So we're really fortunate that we live in a very good neighborhood. The transition has been easy, even though obviously this is not Singapore. Nothing is works like clockwork here. Everything is mañana, which is very famous. So let's do it tomorrow. But
Right.
we had to change the mindset. It was a big reset of the mindset for us coming here, coming from Singapore, where everything works clockwork here. I email my accountant and my lawyer. They only reply on every Fridays. So that's a lot more planning that I need to do. But it's nothing, it's not a criticism of them. It's just the way the cookie crumbles here.
Yeah, but that's a good point, right, Sasi? Because, as Singaporean companies, entrepreneurs, organizations lead, we've all been encouraged to go out of Singapore to get more business, not stay in Singapore, expand regionally, expand globally. And understanding that change of mindset, that change of the way of working, the culture is part of the process, right? And for you, it seems that you've settled pretty well. Last we spoke, you've enjoying your life in Spain with many different projects, and part of that project has been to get young footballers, right? Beyond your sons, of course. We'll talk about your sons shortly, but beyond your sons, get young footballers into the Spanish football ecosystem or even German football ecosystem. So how do you see from an ecosystem itself? Because at the end of the day, business is also an ecosystem, right? No man's an island, right? So from that business ecosystem, what do you think leaders, people listening to this podcast and people experiencing with us the journey of entrepreneurship, what lessons do you think Singapore could learn from, or any one of us?
I think that sometimes in Singapore we are a little bit too boxed with our thinking, right? We look for common answers, commonalities. We don't really test the status quo. Everything has a way of operating, and especially if you know in entrepreneurship, creativity counts a lot. Like entrepreneurs are a different breed. Sometimes we need space. That's something that I really felt stifled in Singapore because I am, to start with, I'm claustrophobic, right?
Right.
I can't be in boxed
That,
environments.
that that's a bit difficult to accept considering you're a tall guy.
Yeah, no, so it makes it worse for me, right? So I
Right.
mean, my head sticks out, and like I feel like I'm in a swamp of ants or something like that. But uh, Spain, especially here in Madrid, gives me space. There's a lot of
Right.
space, a lot of greenery. Allows me to go to a mall where there's no one around. Like I can go park my car, have a coffee, really do deep thinking where I'm not surrounded by a lot of people, which is something I like. That's not for everybody. People like the hustle and bustle, but I enjoy being alone because I like to get deep in my thoughts to think about what's next, what's coming next, and what I can do next, right? So from that perspective, it's really helped me. But I think also as an entrepreneur, and we talk about this a lot, Resham, I think the value of taking a couple of days off from your business is seriously underrated in entrepreneurship because we are in a grind where we always feel we got to be there for 24/7, 365 days a year, grinding away, and we almost feel this guilty trip if we go away for 3 days or 5 days with the family or even yourself, right? So I would really encourage everyone, entrepreneurs listening to this, and say, give yourself a break, like 3 days of just being yourself alone, thinking, deep thinking, maybe meditating, going to a fitness retreat is going to do miracles for you. I did that not too long ago for my 50th birthday. I was a couple of days in Phuket, just
Happy belated birthday.
thank you. Well, it was some time ago though, but
Yeah.
but just that mental reset really helps you. So don't that it's one of the most, I would say, seriously underrated things that a lot of entrepreneurs don't put into their schedule. I mean, this must be a non-negotiable. For every quarter, you need to go away for a couple of days just to reset and come back fresh.
And do
I
you
would
see that
highly
in
encourage
the
it.
football ecosystem as well?
Yeah,
In
sometimes
Spain,
I
do
mean,
you think that it's very different?
no, it's no different because very smart coaches used to do that all the time. I had a coach called Steve Darby when I was at Home United, and he was a master at man management, master class, right? So I always default to what would Steve do in this situation when dealing with team members. So he treated the senior players very differently from the young players. He knew that the bodies couldn't last like how a younger player would do. So he would basically say, okay, you do training in the morning and the rest of the day you're off. Or when we went on trips, they say, okay, today we train, the next 2 days you're off. So he knew that it was not about the actual act of training, it is about giving them mental freedom to players to say that I recognize you as a human being, I let you be who you are, but when I call upon you to be the best version, you're there for me.
Great, great, great point, I think. Now, I said I'll come to your sons, and I'm here now. So, Killian and Dylan, both your boys, how has it been, right? Because I'm sure, you brought them to Spain, you had high dreams, high hopes, but you didn't know how they'll fit in, you didn't know how. he will settle in. And, part of leadership in general has always been also how you manage your family, how you coach your kids, how you encourage them, how you don't mollycoddle them through the journey all the time. How has how has the journey been to help them chase their football dreams? Because I'm sure Spain is a much, much, much more competitive environment than they were used to in Singapore. And for you're bringing in, you're helping a lot of families and boys move to Spain and Germany for football. What advice do you give them from your experience with your boys, and where do you think this journey is going?
So I want to start with the, the most fundamental thing about not just developing a player, I think developing a person. I think in today's society, we overparent our kids. We
Right.
overmother or we overfather our kids in the sense that we understand that we want the best for them, not to the point where the kids are not capable of doing the things themselves, right? We kind of stifle their growth creatively from a maturity point of view of making decisions. In football, maturity comes in the form of making the right decisions on the pitch. That was the difference. When I brought my boys here and we looked at the Spanish kids and them, the Spanish kids seemed to be a bit more mature. That resulted them in making good decisions on the field whenever they had the ball, when they didn't have the ball. My boys coming from Singapore were a little bit, I would say, clouded with this safety blanket where they felt that they didn't things would happen for them because mommy and daddy were here.
And so
So
in
one of the
time.
things, yeah. So one of the things that over the last 3 years I had to do, it was to scrub this off their mind, and it's tough work. I'm very old school when it comes to parenting. I truly believe the hard way of doing things. I don't sugarcoat things. I say as it is, and a lot of time that results in tears. That results in silence in the house. There's conflict or friction between myself and my wife, even sometimes. But I know because I walked this path before as a footballer and then as an entrepreneur that if you don't have the mental resilience, you're not going to go anywhere. Doesn't matter what kind of talent you have, right? If you
And
don't apply
and do you
yourself.
think that, I mean, I've seen football kids in Singapore and on training in the pitch, and I see that parents are getting involved in what the coaches are saying. Parents are saying, "Coach, you should pay my player." You've brought in boys from China, you're bringing boys from Australia and all to Spain, um, as part of one of your new ventures. Do you also feel that the Spanish parents let their boys play and leave? They don't protect them. You had to let go of your boys on the field because you're a coach? You've been a footballer. You think you know better, but have you learned to let go? Because I feel that, you know, one of the problems in the Singapore tuition mindset, everything's a tuition and we control the tuition teacher. But where does that come in with your boys?
No, I'm not perfect. I make a lot of mistakes. I sometimes be the parent that I don't want to be, right?
Right.
We're only human, but I always catch myself saying things that like, don't do that, like, don't do that. And obviously my wife comes and reminds me over and over again. But over time, what I pay more attention to is not the act of playing football. If you don't do this, don't do that. That's secondary. My biggest thing is that how you turn up for the game. That is my biggest thing. Your body language, your energy, your attitude. These are the things I'm looking at because beyond football, this is going to help you in life. If you turn up with the attitude that you don't care, you're sloppy, you think that you don't have to work hard. Now you have a problem with life, not just in football, right?
Right.
So to me, I'm big on these things where you turn up with the correct attitude, with the correct mindset, and back it up with the hard work because then you're building skills for life, not just football. Doesn't matter what happens in football because you're only one tackle away from ending everything, right? But like me, if I took the same philosophy that I seen my life change from being the skinny kid in Yishun and now sitting in Madrid talking to you, that is the ingredient that I kind of live by. This is my mantra, right? This is something that I truly believe in. This is my DNA. So I'm trying to get my kids to try and understand, because why they are here is because that daddy had a certain belief, and the belief was this.
But I'm sure, right, Sassy, on this journey with your boys, you said turn up for the pitch, look the part, feel the part, get the right mindset. But at the end of the day, we all talk about setting goals. All right. At the end of the day, leadership as the father to your boys, right? It's not Steve Darby telling you, or it's not Barry telling you that you're gonna score a goal. But I'm sure you tell your boys that, look, this is where you need to be, right? This is where, as a footballer, you need to accept, what your decisions you have to make. You need to set, work hard, as you mentioned, turn up, not just turn up and show up and throw up, but turn up, work hard, be the part, feel the part, live the part, you know, wear the jersey with pride, play with pride, and stuff like that. But it all comes back to setting goals, right? I hope you agree with me on that. It's all about setting how you set goals for them, how they set goals for themselves. And anyone in Singapore will have a hard time believing that you got your boys into Atletico Madrid. But I think it's important at this point to talk about when you left Singapore, what was the goal? And then when you got there, in the first club they were playing for, what happened? And then how did the goals change and evolve higher?
I'll be lying if I didn't set lofty goals for my boys.
Right,
I did set very high goals for my boys because that's the whole idea. Sometimes, you got to set a goal where people turn around and tell you you are crazy. When somebody tells you your goal is crazy, you're on the right track,
right,
because they can't do it, right? They can't do it, and
right,
they kind of impose that insecurity on you. So when we came across first, while I had, of course, the goal is one side, and then the other side is the actual reality of the ground, right? So my boys joined a club called Rayo Vallecano, which is a La Liga club, and they joined and they played, and I had some contacts in Atletico Madrid purely by the virtue of the work that I do. But just because daddy knows somebody there, you're not just gonna walk in. You still got to turn up and and show and what you did, and that's what we did. We managed to get my boys on trial at Rayo Vallecano. They were supposed to do a trial for 2 weeks, and after the third session, the selectors came to me and said, "Listen, your boys have something that we like. I think we can work on." And that at that point in time, I almost fainted because being a footballer, ex-athlete, the journey that I had, and I'm bringing my sons here, that the idea that my sons are going to play for the Atletico Madrid academy was too hard for me to swallow. It was just too hard for me to
but
accept
was
that.
that the goal? Was that always the goal for them?
Um, Maybe not Atletico Madrid, because I wanted them to play at the highest level possible.
Right,
It was not Atletico Madrid; it could be anywhere else, but I just wanted them to play at the highest level possible. But not too long ago, we went to a tournament in Spain, and my younger one in the semifinals was playing against Barcelona.
right.
Okay, as a father, as a Singaporean, and I see my son walking out with Barcelona, and some of these boys are going to go on to be $100 million player, play for Spain, and the pride that I had. Um, and we look at all the sacrifices we did coming here, then you sit there and you say, if you didn't set these goals for yourself, like if you didn't demand yourself to be in a place, put yourself in that situation, or get out of your comfort zone, put everything you own in four bags and move and convince people this is going to happen, convince your family, your wife, your kids that you're going to get here. And I sat there thinking, if it all ended today, it's still worth it, right?
So
It's
is
still
that
worth it.
is that the goal? To be a father of $100 million player or $100
No,
million
no,
player?
no, it's not. That's the end game. And if you're chasing the end game, and then I think you forget the journey. I think my wife and I, we always instill upon the boys that, whatever happens at the end is beyond your control. But what's within your control is what you do during the journey, right? And the skills you pick
What
up.
goal you set? What is the what like just like in business, we have business plans, we have goals, we need to aim high, otherwise you'll not reach where you want.
Yeah. And you got to do the
So
work,
do,
right?
do
So
you set do you set a number of goals? Because both of your boys, one is an attacker, one is a midfielder. Do you set goal targets for every season?
Oh, we do. Start of the season, we sit together. We almost make like a contract and say, well, how many goals you're gonna score by Christmas? How many goals you're gonna score by Easter? We do that, and like I said, this season is a very very tough season for both, especially my elder son who's going through growth. I think he's had injuries, he had a loss of form, and I think it's important for him to understand. And he's going through a journey on how to be mentally resilient. He's understanding who he is now and what's his purpose in life now, right? At a very young age. So we think about a lot of teenagers, even myself, yourself, when we were growing up as teenagers, we were all lost. We didn't have a purpose,
You just want to
right?
have fun, right?
Yeah, but when I look at these boys, my boys, and I say they have a purpose. They're living with a purpose. They get up in the morning, they go to school, they know they have a training, they have targets, they have this. It's a purposeful life, then, which means that there's a high chance that they will stay away from trouble, which a lot
Right.
of kids get into. So I'm glad in one ways they are doing that. And of course, we try and balance that with them not using that, losing their youth. We still let them be kids when they want to be kids, but it's leading a purposeful life. It's leading a life that's something you're doing something towards a bigger goal.
And that's interesting to me because it seems the goals keep on changing, right? Started off get a play in Spain, then now Atletico Madrid, and then you go on to have bigger dreams for them. They have bigger dreams for themselves because there'll be a time comes where the dream is not only yours, but it's theirs because they have to own their goals, they have to own their dreams, just like all entrepreneurs do, just like all, when you lead a team and come up with a plan or a goal or, some targets per se, you have to work all in unison towards them. Which brings me, I'm going to make it a bit controversial back to a point because you're coming to the end of the podcast. Singapore, has had a goal 2010 before, right? To reach the World Cup by 2010. We all know how that ended up, but in fair point, I think Singapore did achieve a lot in the lead up to that. Now we have our minister, Mr. Edwin Tong's Goal 2034, which envisions Singapore qualifying for the 2034 World Cup, which, in my opinion, your boys could play for at one point of time. So, as a football legend in this legend series, and someone who's seen the sport evolve in Singapore and in Spain, and seen your boys play in Singapore and then to Spain and make it, do you think it's realistic? Do you think it's achievable? Role do you see yourself or the sports fraternity uh, playing a part in getting us there? Because nothing unites Singapore like football, right? So, I mean, I'm not the Straits Times or the newspaper that's going to say anything and put you controversial, but I'm sure everyone has an opinion on this. What's your opinion?
And rightfully so. I think everybody should have an opinion because there's no right and wrong about the way you think. Some people believe, some people don't. But it will be think about my own way, think about my own life and where I've come from and where I've landed. If you don't have lofty goals, then you don't have a goal worth living for, right? And when I first looked at a goal 2034, and I'm like, yeah, of course it looks like an impossible target because when when you start asking how, your mind shuts down. So the question a lot of people ask is like, um, 2034, how? So immediately the brain shuts down, right? Like how? It's impossible. But if we thought about who's going to get us there, we think about the steps that needs to get us there. Whether we will actually get there is immaterial. People are so stuck on the idea that if you then didn't get to the World Cup in 2034, you fail. They are actually missing the point. The point is that the journey, if, even like us, it, will my sons eventually end up playing for Atletico Madrid? There's a less than 1% chance, right?
Right.
They will actually get there. If we take the same theory into this 2034, will we actually get there? There's maybe a 1% chance, 10% chance, whatever chance we're here to get there. But imagine the impact it will have on the industry itself. impact it will have on the young people, the people who make a living through football, the infrastructure play, the entire nation coming towards something. So my question to people is, when did Singaporeans become so pessimistic about goal setting? We are a young nation. We got here because our leaders had this grand idea, grand vision that Singapore is going to be a jewel in the Southeast Asia and has an important role to play globally today. And our ancestors, our grandparents, they all work towards this common vision of some outrageous goal that a swampland is going to be filled with skyscrapers. There's going to be a casino. So if people back then didn't think this way, we would have never been here. So over time, people have become so pessimistic about the future. People have taken the opportunity to burn down any ideas. People have taken to take pot shots at lofty goals, especially in sports. We all know there's no secret that football is in the doldrums. We know that. But imagine we don't have a project like that, where we will be today. Okay, today we have, I would say, 15, 16 kids across the world. My boys are, just think about this. You have two Singaporeans playing in Atletico Madrid. You have 10, 12 boys and girls in Spain. There are other kids around the world because this vision came to idea. Now we have the possibility to send our brightest and the youngest players out into the world, right? So if it didn't start from an ideation, if it didn't become a grand goal, where would football be sitting today? So this is my question to people who have become critics, become pessimistic about a goal that, why are you so stuck up with the end goal when the journey can be beautiful by itself?
And I bring this back to leadership and the whole idea of my podcast here is about the general vision of how leaderships in sports are like. And as a Singaporean, as a person who's been following football for a very, very long time, from the 80s, been to National Stadium and everything, the passion's been missing. I
Mm.
remember there was this season we got relegated to Division Two, and we were we in the M League, and we were like, we'll come up next season, and we did, and we always, and then we'll say we'll win the title, and we did. And I just feel that whether it's sports, whether it's the goal 2034 for World Cup, I agree with you. It puts into motion the steps we have to take to get somewhere. Be it in football or in business, I think planning forward is essential. As you mentioned the word jewel, we do have a jewel at Changi Airport today, right? And you and I can remember that Terminal 1 car park was Terminal 1 car park. We never imagined it would
Exactly.
turn out to be a jewel it is. So I think whether it's in business or whether it's in sport, we need to have a target. And if the powers that be who run the football and who set the targets put that out there, I think someone has to stand up and at least set up some plans to reach there.
So since we are talking about leadership, let's get into this, right? Imagine if Minister Wintong didn't come out and have this bold vision. And it's not easy for somebody in his position to come out and say those things, right? I'm not
Yeah,
sure if I was in the same position that I would make this bold statement. Maybe I will, maybe I don't. But the idea that for a minister who is leading sports and he comes out with a bold statement and saying that, we're going to go for this bold vision. Of course, at some point it doesn't, there are two groups, people who believe in it and there'll be people who don't believe in it. And that's the beauty of this, right?
the debate.
Yeah, exactly. And to me, I see firsthand, because of this goal, this grand vision, how things are changing the climate of football today. And a lot of people from the outside can't see it, which is a pity, but I think we need to do a better job kind of communicating what's the change that's happening within. So we won't see the labor of this movement, this idea of the unleash the raw with what the government has come together and put this now. We won't see it. It's like a tree that's growing 10 years from now, 15 years from now, you see the impact of what the decision, the government, Minister Wintong, or the entire group that came together, or everybody who has played a part in this. We will sit back 10 years ago, 15 years later from now, maybe do a podcast and we say, remember we said this in 2025.
Yeah, I'm going to take a step back here because you made a good point, right? And you talk about these goals being steps in the right direction in terms of the small steps. Do you think, for example, the setup of Lion City Sailors, which your boys went to in training in Singapore, was, was the first step in a journey of football success because they set up a total different environment to what it was, and they set up different goals. And I remember when they were talking about this training center, and they were talking about bringing in and being very very professionally run, and Mr. Forrestley putting in money and whatever not. Nobody believed it, and your boys lived through it, and your boys then
I
got to
think,
Spain.
yeah, I like to obviously, again, when you got a man like Forrest Lee coming in, putting money into a sport that we love, we like. It's always heartening to see that, investment is made into sport. Any kind of investment made into sport is it's a good thing. And obviously, you see the way they have built what they have built. But again, at the end of the day, it's not about one club. It needs to have 10 such ecosystems in Singapore, right? Then we then truly have a very competitive landscape, because there's
And,
also a chance that when you are the best, you tend to monopolize things, right?
and do you think, sorry to interrupt, Sassy, but do you think, and this is a controversial question here, right? We've seen big organizations sponsor the Formula One. We've seen a lot of sports get big names behind it. And do you think that with Goal 2034 in position that has been set up to set some direction for the football, do you think that it will now open the pathways because the government's now setting up some commitment toward football, that we then see the industry or the non-football industry shift a bit of focus and money away from other sports that could bring and come back to football, where we can see 60,000, 70,000 people come back as a nation that no other sport has.
Yeah, it's a bit of a catch-22, because what you don't want to do also completely erase the sport ecosystem, meaning that all the other sports get drained of their funding, which they are already struggling to get, and then
Yeah.
everything goes into football. And obviously, the common argument is that why football? Because we haven't had any success. But to your point earlier, there's no other sport that can fill the stadium like football. There's no other sport that can create the same kind of euphoria. The closest we got to, it was when Joseph Schooling won the Olympic gold medal. I think he created that kind of a euphoria among Singaporeans. But imagine creating that kind of euphoria week in, week out in Singapore, right? So people understand. I think the government understands the power of football now, power of sports now, which is it's soft power, right? It needs to tug at the hearts of people. So I'm glad that these initiatives are happening. I'm glad that we are moving towards a more healthy Singapore, because more kids will play now. More kids have more opportunities with the youth league that's happening, Singapore Youth League, that more teams are coming up out of nowhere, forming grassroots clubs are forming, which means that more communities are being set up, which is good for Singapore. It's also a criticism that Singaporeans don't interact with each other anymore. There seems to be always conflict wherever you watch, on TikTok or Instagram. So all of these community initiatives, I think, can only mean good for Singapore. At the end of the day, football is the conduit, but we'll see so much of this domino effect happening across different communities, and really affecting the society, which I think at the end of the day, from a leadership perspective, is something that you want even in your own company, right?
Yeah. So, Mr. Sasi, it's been a great time. It's been a podcast that has really, really, really drifted beyond its original time. One final words from you. I'm focusing right now on you to talk, say, leadership and sports. What unites it, and how do we ensure that people in organizations, because let's face reality, most entrepreneurs, most organizations will have management, will have leadership, will have business plans. How does sport and leadership unite?
So I think at the end of the day, the common denominator or common factor here is you're dealing with humans, right? Sport is played by human, and especially with business, is you're dealing with human beings. if you truly care for the well-being of the people, if you truly care about the growth of people, really care about what matters to them most, and bring the best out of that person, is leadership. At the end of
Right.
the day, if you can find somebody that has the potential and get them to the next level, and they find the true version of themselves, I think they can be truly committed to the company, to the cause, what they're doing. The same like in sports. If you can bring, as a coach, what your job is to bring the best out of an athlete. For example, you brought up Roger Federer. Roger Federer doesn't need to learn about tennis from his coach. He doesn't, right? But what the coach does is he brings the best out of Roger Federer. He looks at the blind side and says, you got to do this better, do this better. So I think these two are very closely intertwined. If you can put the human being at the center of both, I think we have a high chance of success. And if we do care about people and we do care about their growth, their fears, their aspirations, at the end of the day, I think leadership will become much easier. It is not an easy path to care for people because we can all tend to be selfish. But at the end of the day, if you can master the act between being a boss, being a human, being a coach, being a confidant, being the brother, the sister, whoever the relationship, I think then you can truly build a people and business that's truly meaningful for everybody involved.
And one quote that you always have used, which I find a bit conflicting, maybe you would explain a bit more before we go. But running a business and playing a sport is about being a professional team and not a family. I think I've heard you say this a few times. Yet you say that thinking about a human as a brother, sister is important. How then do you run an organization, or how then do you run a coach as a team, as a coach, when you need to play a professional team? Where's the gap?
Yeah, no. So again, that's a good question. It can be sounding conflicting when you say don't. So I always tell people I mentor or business owners, like, do not treat your co-workers, your staff like family. Treat it like a professional team. But that's not to mean that you can't care for somebody, right? Same thing as a professional coach. Maybe the player is out of form, but that doesn't mean you don't care for him. Just does mean that he's not ready to do the job that you want. You're not ready to discard him, throw him away, and not give him the respect or the care he needs. That's where
Right.
I'm coming from, like treating somebody like family. You can still have the care for them, but if they're not doing the job for you to move the needle, then you need to move them aside. Sometimes in companies, and I know great leaders have moved people sidewards because they know they're not set for the specific role. Maybe they're doing some other jobs better. I've done it recently. We took a guy that was not really good at something, and then we put him into another place, and he's thriving now. Because the easy thing could be that you're not useful, let's go. That's where I come back to the point. My point being that you can care for them as a brother or sister, because sometimes that care can help you think about another solution. But at the end of the day, do not carry passengers. Like any high performing sports team, do not carry passengers.
Right. I think that's the final word from Mr. Kumar. Do not carry passengers, play like a professional team, set your goals right, and you'll get there. You're living your dream, my friend. Thank you very much for joining us on the podcast today. And we hope to have you on other podcasts soon. When we get the other sports legends on, maybe you can drop in and give us a few words and share some insights with them. Some of them are your ex-teammates, so I think it'll be a great session on the next episode. Thank
Thanks
you.
for having me. It was a real pleasure being on the show, and I'm looking forward to the other episodes as well now.
Great. Thank you very much. Cheers.